time, science and religion, are seen as siloed in two very different areas. But, but what we need to think about is oops, wait a second. We had a nice slide of Einstein. But anyway, okay, we have this science. Oh, there it is. Good. Science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind. And I think this is one of our greatest challenges inside of academia and outside. And that's where Teilhard and, of course, Barry are so important. So we have the science, the policy, the law, the economics, and technology to make the transition to a viable future. And our environmental crisis, though, is a spiritual and an ethical crisis. You know, we're at a school of the environment, and we have all this science and policy, et cetera. But what we're missing, the spiritual energies and the ethical directions to overcome despair and disempowerment, especially of youth. And of course, the movement towards spiritual but not religious is a broad search for meaning and purpose, despite the eco-anxiety. Purpose and belonging is what young people are looking for, as we know. So how to live life with connection to others, to nature, and to the universe. So the stress of the climate emergency is wearing all of us down. And we've just come from Climate Week in New York, which was actually very inspiring in a lot of ways. And the spiritual search for integration with climate issues is very strong, very pronounced. Now, climate refugees, as we know, all over the world are causing incredible upheavals, and there's well over 100 million refugees, many living in camps for years and years. So we have the largest migrations in human history are happening right now, and the suffering is enormous. We also have levels of pollution that are beyond anything in our lifetime. This is the river, the Yamuna River in Delhi, and it also runs behind the Taj Mahal. And it's a sacred river, and yet it is massively polluted, as are all the rivers in India and many in China and even in our own country. So the water issue is going to be increasingly important. We're also in the sixth extinction period of biodiversity loss. And Thomas Berry used to say, as species go extinct, we're losing a divine voice. Each one of these amazing species, some of them disappearing before our eyes. So we're going to discuss then some integral ecologists here tonight.
And of course, the concept of integral ecology used quite often in Laudato Si in the encyclical, and it brings together, it integrates social justice with eco-justice. So we want to explore how Pierre Teilhard de Chardin and his attention to the cosmos as home brings these ideas together. And Thomas Berry's emphasis on a living earth community, how this finds expression by Pope Francis in the encyclical, where he brings together cry of the earth and cry of the poor. And that expression especially is a call for integral ecology that awakens also the call for eco-spirituality, namely a sense of awe and at the wonder and beauty of creation. When eco-spirituality is brought into relationship with eco-justice, it calls forward action on behalf, as the liberation theologian Leonardo Boff suggested in his book titled Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor, which Francis brought directly into the encyclical. It brings together their integration or unitive action. The sense then of the contributions of a person like Pierre Teilhard de Chardin to Laudato Si and to our thinking today about integral ecology. His dates are very important, 1881 to 1955, 19th century into the 20th, and so a major contribution to 20th century thinking. As a Jesuit and paleontologist, he found expression early in his childhood, raised in southern France in the province of Auvergne. His mother introduced him to a deeply religious life and his father to the natural world. So Teilhard very early on had these two streams flowing in his knowledge gathering and in his understanding of reality. He entered the Jesuits as a teenager and in those studies then was eventually ordained. And of course, there's so much that can be said about his experiences in England, his encounter with the cliffs of Dover. But I wanted to move ahead to when he returned to France. He was already ordained, and before he entered his formal studies, he was a stretcher bearer in World War I. This is many Teilhard scholars have realized that the essays that he wrote during this period of World War I, in which he saw meaning in the deep suffering experienced during the war, in terms of evolution. So the evolutionary story and deep time thinking is crucial to understanding Teilhard de Chardin. His field of study then was paleontology and geology, paleontology, old life forms, especially humans. So he was fascinated with fossils and how fossils relate to landforms. So you can see how geology is the context in which he's locating hominin or hominid and other fossil forms. He was he went to China on his own in 23, but then he was exiled in 26 and lived in China for more than 20 years. During that time, he traveled extensively across in China. In fact, in many parts of the world, he was involved in the discovery of Peking Man in 27. And again, the emphasis here is on evolution as the science religion challenge of Teilhard's time. He brought together these ideas in his writings, especially Hymn of the Universe, a work that comes out of his essays in World War I, in which he is reflecting, he is trying to explain both to his peers and his order, his understanding of how religion and evolution are speaking to one another. Again, the Mass on the World, this profound statement where Teilhard, as a priest, goes to say Mass without bread and wine, and he then consecrates or enters into a liturgy where the world is made his sacramental agents. And this again comes out of World War I. He wrote about this and perfected his understanding of it in the Ordos Desert while he was in China. And it was in these settings also that he wrote this major work, The Divine Milieu, the sense of evolutionary universe as a milieu and the earth as the most immediate experience of that sense of the divine or sacred universe, we might even say. So Teilhard's major work, The Human Phenomenon, written primarily in China, he had begun it earlier in his life, but he finished that work in the 40s and he brought it back hoping it would be accepted. It was not published during his lifetime. It's his major effort to tell the story of the evolutionary universe with the focus on the human. So this sense then of Teilhard's life story and his thought, they go hand in hand. He dies in New York in 1955. He came to New York as a remaining place of exile. Both his order and the Vatican would not allow him to return to France. His spiritual ideas were considered too radical at the time. And again, a large context for that charge of being too radical was the religion-evolution relationship. He worked at the Vandergrande Foundation, also at the American Museum of Natural History, and gave several talks in this area. And so his work continues as it comes down to us. And it's obvious that his deep reverence for life, the sense of the integration of social justice and eco-justice, his understanding then that humans come out of a vibrant life system that has been brought forward by universe processes. And so this reverence for humans is embedded in the community of life in which he feels the human is deeply related and in deep reciprocity. It's this understanding then that Teilhard saw as the the possibility for generating the zest for life in between the two world wars and afterwards, even that sense of the pressures on the human, the oppressive pressures on the human that could be inspired by human action in this relational context. He also has a deeply mystical dimension where he is searching for a God beyond name and form. As he said, God must be as vast as the universe and as warm as a human heart, and incomparably more besides. This is all we can say. You can sense Teilhard's feeling for the infinitely large and the interior of the human heart and the complexity of trying to find the language to express this. So the energies of the earth are what Teilhard drew on for this zest in each one of us. Through matter, the whole history of the world is reflected. So Teilhard's understanding of this relationship of spirit matter, he did not see these as separate or two realities, but rather they are two dimensions of the one reality. Spirit is drawing matter forward. Energy, or the Christic as he would call it, sometimes cosmogenesis and unfolding universe. Spirit, energy, cosmogenesis are drawing matter forward. Matter is subject to entropy, namely the effect of gravity, which draws down and breaks apart. So it would seem that Teilhard would be deeply committed simply to spirit, but in fact, he had a profound commitment to their relationship, spirit matter. And he would express very profound understandings of the necessity of matter and how significant the world or matter was. So this omega point, often people read it as the end point because it's the last point of the Greek alphabet. And certainly Teilhard did see it as a future moving towards an omega point. But actually, Teilhard saw omega point as from the very beginning of the cosmos. And so it's the human capacity to enter into this story that Teilhard saw as providing the zest for life. In 2005, on the 50th anniversary of Teilhard's death, we held activities both at the United Nations and throughout many settings in New York. It was an exquisite event where Brian Swim and Mary Evelyn and myself and several, I think, major scholars of Teilhard presented at the United Nations. Over 200 came from France to attend that event and the New York events. So it was a wonderful remembrance of Teilhard's contribution to our contemporary thinking.
Yeah, there were 1,000 people at the UN, actually.
Yeah.
And it was a stunning moment where Teilhard was very much appreciated at the UN earlier on because understanding that we need peace among nations and so on. So Thomas Berry, our teacher, was, of course, deeply influenced by Teilhard, and as were we. And these books, I'm sure many of you have and have read The Dream of the Earth, his first book in '88. The Sacred Universe was one of his later books that we collected of his religious writings and more relevant right now. The Great Work was 1999 and is still in bookstores everywhere. And Evening Thoughts is a marvelous collection, which has also his Earth Jurisprudence at the end of it, an appendix. Now, his biography in his later years, he was born, of course, in North Carolina and in the South, but he directed the History of Religions program at Fordham. And that program is where we met. And there was no program like it in the country. No Catholic university had anything like History of Religions. And his library had like 10,000 books. He had studied so many of these traditions on his own, including indigenous religions, which John took up, and I took up the Asian religions, and especially Confucianism that he was an expert in. And he went to China in 1948. He learned Chinese so that he could study these Asian traditions. Now, he was also president of the American Teilhard Association for these 12 plus years, and we took it over in '87. And helped lead it forward for 40 years. And there's wonderful new leadership now, which we encourage you to pick up on. So at the Riverdale Center of Religious Research, we had monthly meetings for some 25 years on Teilhard meetings, but there would always be a speaker. Thomas would always speak in November when it was his birthday, and then we'd have a potluck afterward, and it created the most amazing community. And in part, John and I wanted to create this community to nurture Thomas's ideas, because frankly, his auditor didn't understand them, just like Teilhard. Neither of them were understood by their auditors. And Teilhard was supported, as you know, by many women and many friends. So these gatherings of anywhere from 40, 50, 60 people were absolutely filled all of us with a zest for life that Teilhard was especially looking for, and so are we in our own times. So Thomas helped birth this notion of eco-spirituality, if you will. And he would say, at its core, even our spirituality is earth-derived. The human and the earth are totally implicated, each in the other. And in this essay, The Spirituality of the Earth, he says, if there is no spirituality, excuse me, in the earth, then there's no spirituality in ourselves. You know, this is a fairly unique idea and something that Thomas and Teilhard both understood very, very well, and we're recovering that now. But he also said this spiritual presence in all life. He lamented that we could no longer hear the voices of the meadows, the mountains, or the seas. Excuse me, the trees and meadows are no longer intimate modes of spirit presence. The world about us has become an it rather than a thou. And that is still true for many, many people. And therefore, if it's an it, we can exploit it, we can mine it, and so on. But he saw ecology as living systems. So he would say, our studies in what we call ecology to see this, must lead to such intimacy with our natural surroundings. Only intimacy can save us from our present commitment to a plundering industrial economy. This is the missing link that we were talking about at the beginning. We have the science and policy and law, but we're missing the spiritual presence in the deep time of Teilhard and the evolutionary story, and in the earth time that Thomas also emphasized so beautifully in his writings.
Subjectivity.
So he would say that Earth is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects, which I'm sure you've all heard. And more we're understanding that. We'll speak a little bit more, hopefully, in the question and answer period about it. And if we recognize this, he would say, this is the great work of our time to create a flourishing future based on the sense of intimacy and resonance and reciprocity. So we have the cosmic and then eco-spirituality from Teilhard and from Thomas. We have an appreciation for the sacred universe out of which Earth and life evolve and to which we belong. This is our fundamental destiny and something we are coming into, even with all the chaos that we're living amidst. The younger generation is so eager to enter this space. People last week in New York and climate change, you can feel this drive to recenter ourselves within the living Earth community. When we take this into all kinds of visuals, Natural History Museum has this sense we're born into in the Hall of the Universe, which is 25 years old, that from the great flaring forth, the stars are our ancestors. This is available in the Natural History Museum, in the Field Museum in Chicago, too. So here we've got the great flaring forth, the emergence of stars and galaxies, and all the elements coming out of starburst. It's extraordinary. I mean, Carl Sagan said it as well, that we come from the stars. and how people want to not just hear this in their mind or even visualize it, but they want to experience it. And that's what's happening with a new embodiment of cosmogenesis. So here we have a magnificent picture a friend took in central Pennsylvania of our Milky Way galaxy. Just extraordinary. And we're moving towards the harvest moon this weekend. And that sense we're part of the universe, of our planetary system, solar system, but we're also part of seasonal systems as autumn comes on. So this evokes in us a reverence, a respect, but also a responsibility. The reverence is valuing the complexity of Earth and the profound interdependence of all life systems. Who's not drawn to a sunrise or a sunset?
The sense of respecting all of life is evoked from us by this realization that all life is connected and emerged here on Earth after billions of years of evolution. Nowhere else in our solar system do we encounter life as we know it. So this sense again of the viewing of the Earth in space opened new possibilities. It transformed our understanding of ourselves on this planet. And it brought us ever closer in an interesting way. As much as the planet was hanging in this depth of space, it also opened up a new interiority in ourselves for the planet that we live on. And this interiority we now sense along with indigenous people who have long spoken of their relationship with mountains and the sense of mountains and the flow of water and the depth of life that comes out of mountains. And so also this responsibility is evoked for the future of life. We know that we are responsible for the care and continuity of the Earth community. This sense of the generations of the human has always fascinated, but now we begin to realize as biodiversity loss confronts us, we are responsible for the whole Earth community. This sense of trees and the communication in the root systems with fungi, these utterly new understandings of life systems that are coming forward and ecosystems and their relationships of life forms in the cascading of this phenomenon of vitality on the planet. In the marine world, we have depth of understanding now, and one these amazing understandings where 20 years ago we were convinced that the deep sea vents were now providing us with a insight into where life may have started, but that is now being challenged, and also a coordinated or complementary understanding that the vents on top of the Earth, these heat vents, are themselves capable of generating cellular life. So there's this amazing sense of the watery world that the planet is. Atmosphere is so important in climate change, and we feel with this raptor the sense of movement in that atmosphere, not as something alien anymore, but it's part of our interiority. It's part of that which we are handing on to our children. And this language of the intergenerational handshake has been very significant in the work that Mary Eva and I do as we understand the next generation and the Earth community that they will inherit, and how we hope for them to evoke the responsible, the sense of our new freedom, a newfound freedom, namely responsibility for our kinship with the Earth community.
So that's why, of course, we did the Journey of the Universe project, multimedia project. Many of you know the film. It was on PBS for 3 years. It's on Amazon now. And the book, we just had a discussion at Yale Divinity School 2 days ago on students reading the book. And the podcast, which are interviews of 10 scientists. And some students, and our distributor actually loves the podcast. If you haven't had a chance to look at it. We'll send you afterwards a flyer where you can get direct access to watch these interviews, or you can listen to them as podcasts. 10 are scientists and 10 are environmentalists, some of whom you might know, including Paula Gonzalez years ago, talking about energy and so on. We've got African Americans and Native Americans in those podcasts, and there's online courses as well through Coursera. And the website and newsletter, I hope you'll sign up for, because this is exploding. Not Journey of the Universe is just part of a larger movement in terms of cosmogenesis that Brian's working on, and as well how we become a member of a cosmic Earth community. So Journey, of course, is indebted to Teilhard's evolutionary perspective and the new story of Barry that came out in 1978. It won an Emmy in Northern California. And the book and the film is in many languages, many European languages, in Chinese, and it's had a huge reception in China. I'll just say one thing about that, because the Chinese cosmology is heaven, earth, and human, or cosmos, earth, and human as one celebratory event. And when Brian's getting onto the boat at the end of the Journey film, and we say, what if we imagine ourselves as the mind and heart of the universe? And mind and heart are one character in Chinese. So when we show it in China, and the audiences are very excited, there's Chinese subtitles and so on, the book's in Chinese, we've got all the online courses in Chinese, and the students will be like, we understand. This is our cosmology too. So we're going to move towards our conclusion with Laudato Si and Pope Francis. And he has in this letter a note about the Earth Charter, which I hope you all know of. It's just been celebrating its 25th anniversary. It came out in 2000. I was blessed to be part of the drafting committee. But the Pope says the Earth Charter asked us to leave behind a period of self-destruction and make a new start, but we've not as yet developed a universal awareness needed to achieve this. And that's what Teilhard and Thomas are calling us to, a universal awareness to ecological conversion. So the encyclical, of course, was a very broad invitation to Catholics around the world, to Christians, Orthodox and Protestant. That's 2 billion people. And no encyclical has been as broadly invitational as Laudato Si, because it's also addressed to people of all religions, spiritual people, seekers, people on the whole Earth community. And that's Pope Francis's remarkable ecumenism, interreligious sensibility, but his human sensibilities too. And the response of the world's religions, as you may know, has been very positive and affirming. There's writing their own statements. The Muslim community has written one on the idea of balance. And many people wanting to work with the Laudato Si movement, many youth, fortunately. So the response of the world's religions has been very strong. On our website, you can see those responses. But as well, the response of environmentalists has been beyond what we could have ever expected. It's been very positive from scientists and ecologists. Bill McKibben, whom you all know, is the founder of 350.org. He has a new book called Here Comes the Sun, talking about solar power. When he came to Yale and he spoke to 1,000 people, the next morning at breakfast, he said to us, Mary Evelyn and John, Laudato Si is the most important document of the 21st century. Now, to have him say this, a wonderful Methodist and a religious-minded person and very supportive of all this work, but to say something on that level, and he's written 20 or 25 books, is quite extraordinary. So the point here, and even here at Yale, our former dean, wanted us to do a panel at Yale on Laudato Si in April of 2015 before it actually came out. We were all waiting for it to come out, and it was delayed a bit. And we had an extraordinary panel, standing room only, lawyers, economists, and so on. So even secular people understand how important this message is. And just to conclude this part, it begins with science. Again, no other encyclical has done that, to begin with the scientific facts.
Now, that's an amazing point, that opening with science, and then moving in the second chapter to this gospel of creation, namely his eco-spirituality, opening the encyclical to the mystery of the universe, a sense of awe in the face of creation, and understanding that the harmony of creation is embedded in the human. And the interdependence of all life is not simply something given, but it's also something we need to cultivate and acquire. The third chapter moves towards the human roots of the ecological crisis. It's very critical of the human attitude of simply an instrumental use of nature. It raises consumerism and materialism as prominent areas of the degradation of the planet and what's causing problems, and also the market-based solutions for Francis are not sufficient. We have a colleague who, when he read the market-based section of the encyclical, found himself very critical. And yet, when he went to Paris for the discussions for the Paris Agreement, when he came back, he held up the encyclical, and he, in a public panel that we were on, he made the statement, this is one of the reasons we got the Paris Agreement, because of Laudato Si. So he himself came to understand this sense of market-based solutions were not enough. The fourth chapter, again, so central to what we're talking about tonight, the integral ecology as bringing together social and eco-justice. So Francis explores ecology here and the relationship to economics and how equity plays a role, the sense of ethics, all of this leading to action for solidarity with the poor and the sense of recovering and leading towards intergenerational eco-justice. So in integral ecology in this book becomes the portal or the opening to ecological conversion, this term that Leo is carrying forward now. So living the story is how we carry on this tradition.
So this is what Thomas was calling us all to do, and how the encyclical has that invitation as well. So the invitation is, it's orienting us to the cosmos, and it grounds us in Earth's living systems. It nurtures us with water, air, and food, and it transforms us with the energy for change, this zest for life that Teilhard was so keen on, a gusto. And I like to think of, we do in our class, kind of the orienting to the heavens, the grounding in the earth. We do a little qigong with this, and then nurturing with food and water, and transforming with the energy for change. Because, Teilhard, between the two world wars, felt that human energy was depleted and exhausted. And he was concerned that the lack of meaning and purpose, even in the existentialists of people we love, of Sartre and Camus and so on, but that there was no deep way of activating human energy for the flourishing of the earth community. So that's why Zest for Life was so important for Teilhard, for Thomas, and for us. So as we conclude with this reciprocity with nature.
Thomas's statement in the essay Alienation in the Sacred Universe, where he says, it is this renewed sense of reciprocity with nature in all of its complexity and remarkable beauty that can help provide the psychic and spiritual energies necessary for the work ahead.
And eco-spirituality and eco-justice that we've been weaving together here is inspiring both awe and action. In education, in schools and colleges and seminaries, all the Jesuit universities have made a commitment now for Laudato Si to be central to the commitment, to the curriculum. Those of you in Chicago may know Loyola University is the premier place among Jesuit universities that have led this forward. Barbara Tuchman, a scientist, and Mark Schutt
Yeah.
in the theology department have done an amazing job. And there's leadership emerging for community empowerment in the NGO community and elsewhere. We've got to develop resilience and inspiration, which is key. And people are realizing this is a long-term change. It's not going to happen in a decade, 20 years. In China, when I ask about the changes that are needed, they say, oh, it'll take at least 100 years. So this long-term thinking is also something to be encouraged. And we have the power of art now to embody eco-spirituality. Here at Yale, we have an astonishing array of people coming with paintings and music and dance and theater, which is very, very encouraging.
So this enduring influence of Teilhard and Thomas Berry is quite obvious in the call to integral ecology and the way that it's being expressed now. The resistance to our current administration's lack of attention to many of these issues is part of this budding ecological spirituality where the connection is made to the issues of social justice and eco-justice. Ecological education is obviously the portal to ecological conversion, namely, as we cultivate, as we begin to educate ourselves, encounter these ideas, find ways to put them into action, then the transformation begins to take place, in which we realize we are not simply alone on this planet, we are part of a larger Earth community. And the depth of deep time in which this community has come forward is a profound spiritual vision.
So that's where we will conclude. And we invite you to you can explore these websites, of course. The Journey of the Universe, the Forum on Religion and Ecology is a wonderful website for Thomas Berry, and many of his writings are up there. And we're also working on ecological civilization in China. We've been there many, many times, especially since COVID, and we can talk about that in the in the Q&A. But we thank you.
Yes, thank you very much
Thank
for
you so much.
letting us give these remarks.
Look forward to questions, comments, suggestions, disagreements, whatever's on your mind. And you can put your questions in the chat as you like. Oh, Jean, you're so sweet.
Sheila, are you raising your hand?
Yes, I am.
And it is being recorded.
Okay.
And maybe you can make your questions, not too long so we can and have lots of people make their points too. Sheila, jump in there.
In this presentation, I would please invite you to consider putting in an image of a maternal, pregnant, gestating, healthy life system that is mother prenate with the surround of the supporting environment. I'm working on something called womb life literacy, and I think it would be a really good thing to heal what the church has done with this redemptive and the women are blah, 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 and all the misogyny. If you put just one beautiful picture in there,
Good.
that would be a good thing.
I love it. Maybe Mary Southard has one. We have several of her paintings on our walls here. That's a beautiful idea. I just completely love it.
Good.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
We'll do that.
And when Mary Evelyn speaks about orienting, grounding, nurturing, and transforming, it's not just the nurturing. All of those dynamics flow out of that maternal relationship. Thanks, Sheila.
Yeah. Other suggestions or things that could be put in. We're going to be speaking at St. John's, as I mentioned, John's alma mater.
Notre Dame.
And Notre Dame, and doing some versions of this in those various settings. Because I think you all are much more familiar with both Teilhard and Thomas, but we are surmising that many other Catholic universities are not. So Felicia, I see your hand is up, please.
Mine is a question which may be too long. What caught my attention was you mentioning the Peking man.
Hmm.
And I have, in studying about evolution, we have been inundated with all of life begins in Africa and spreads out, and that there are very few archaeological finds in Asia because of its climate. But a few weeks ago, Nova presented how we are finding last year all these different
Hominid forms.
hominid forms in Asia. And it struck me how you're saying China's taken off with this.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned Peking man, wasn't that stolen? Nobody knows where it is, or and I said, what clandestine plan was that about? Saying that, I think it's maybe the heavy influence of Christianity and science and wanting Adam to be in Africa and the one single beginning of all of humanity. But I'm fascinated by all this humanity developed in multiple places.
That's a lovely observation, and our understanding of the emergence of life is changing radically. I mentioned the
Yeah,
deep sea vents and the vents on top of the heated vents. That world is explosive now, and also you're drawing attention to the sense of more than one hominid form.
yeah,
The current consensus is that all of these hominid forms radiate back or relate back to the East African emergence of the Homo form, Homo habilis, and then later the different forms of the human that emerged. But the smaller humans, I think largely in the Southeast Asian realm, that is not entirely clear. And then also in the Georgian region of the Black Sea and Caspian Sea region, these are hominid forms which are not entirely clear. Have they been absorbed into the later version, which is the only form of hominid we know on the planet now, namely Homo sapiens? But the sense of very differentiated forms. Teilhard, of course, was involved in the early findings of human evidence in a planetary sense. He was active in Indonesia with the Indonesian form, an Indonesian man, in Africa when some of the earliest forms of hominid were found. And these early understandings, and for Teilhard, they opened up 2 points, and let me end with that. The sense of the human emerging and becoming more complex. And that is an observation of Teilhard which still holds in the science community. Evolution gives us the example and the appearance of increasingly complex life and the ever expanding sense of consciousness. And for Teilhard, these were both very important terms, complexity and consciousness. For Teilhard, he would say if consciousness is in we humans, and we now extend that into the earth, much larger in the earth community, Teilhard would say it must be there from the very beginning. And just another point, Teilhard's sense of fire, of discovering the technology of fire. Teilhard was really fascinated with technology and the movement of the human in ever-increasing complexity.
Yeah, and Peking Man was when the Japanese invaded China and when the Chinese tried to get out their major artworks to Taiwan and so on, Peking Man was lost in that upheaval of war and disruption. So to this, maybe it'll be found one day, but to this day, it is not. The actual find is
But
not available.
molds were made of it so that
Yeah.
they have a very clear representation of what it looked like.
So Bill,
but all this explosion of understanding different source origins of life
yes,
just indicates to me we don't know much about creation
yeah,
Exactly.
that's
and
so
how abundant and resilient it is. We just
yeah.
don't. I can't wrap my head around that. I mean, that's all. I better stop.
No, I think that's true. Yeah, there was an exhibit years ago at the Natural History Museum in New York that brought all the major finds together in
Early fossil
early fossil evidence, which was an extraordinary thing. But we're still new in understanding it. Bill.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the program this evening. As I was listening and thinking about, we have all of these wisdom teachers from Teilhard and Thomas and Brian Swim and the work that you're doing. And I guess, so where are the next sources coming from? You talked about the kind of this Chinese sense that, this is not a 5 or 10 year problem. This is something that will outlive all of us who are on this call tonight. But where are the voices and where's the wisdom coming from that will help carry this forward and will be able to react to events as they change and as we unfortunately kind of fail to really take this seriously? We're now dealing with other problems of migration but I'll stop there and just in terms of the question. I'm just trying to get a sense of where's the wisdom coming from?
Great.
Where do you expect it to come from?
Well, many different directions. Each one of these projects that we've been doing for 30, 40 years, inspired by Teilhard and Thomas. I mean, there was no field of religion and ecology 30 years ago when we started those conferences at Harvard. And now there's 30 graduate programs in religion and ecology. And there's an explosion of literature being every month will I make a blurb for a new book and so on. So, that came out of huge amount of work by many, many people and against great odds, because religion in secular academia is really disregarded. And we can say that from our experience 40 years within it. So, and Journey of the Universe, as I was saying in China, the first time we showed it in China, 77,000 people watched it.
Wow.
And there are people now, we were just there in the spring, who are taking it into small groups and discussion and making a study guide for it and bringing it out in grassroots and eco-villages and places of meditation. It's really quite amazing. And that's part of the eco-civilization story that we'll be telling more of. You can look at our website, you can Google that. Because China is the most important country on the planet for the future. And they believe that the transformations have got to have a spiritual dimension. And their own tradition of Confucianism is being filtrated into that. And we have a Zoom on Monday evening on ecological civilization with a great Confucian scholar. So we can send out that information. But as well, I just want to say, maybe John wants to jump in here, obviously, but we've got the students, we just celebrated a new website that maybe John can share with you. Just yesterday, we brought it out, called Living Earth Community. It's taken a year and a half. This next generation who has helped to create it is astounding. So we feel very positive of people who are picking this up in deep understandings of Teilhard and Thomas. And this Living Earth Community has gotten amazing response from many parts of the world.
Well, thanks for framing my discussion.
I can say something
I'll weave
about it.
my ideas. This new website, though, is fascinating enough that I'll let Mary Evelyn determine where it is, what it is that I'm going to say, because it has 3 wings to it. Intelligences of nature is the first wing, and the second is ecological worldviews. The first, intelligence of nature. If the world is speaking ecological worldviews, how is the human responding to the earth, which is speaking to itself as well as to humans? And the third wing is earth law, a sense of bringing to action. But Bill, I wanted to explore, even just briefly, 2 areas that I think are filled with creativity now in response to your question. And that's the world of art, of performance art. Almost every conference that we go to now, where scientists, social scientists, or humanists are speaking from out of their discipline, that sense of the disciplinary response, while it's still valued, we have moved beyond that and even interdisciplinary, that idea where disciplines talk to one another. Now people are talking transdisciplinary, namely, the disciplines have to be integrated and new creativity is coming out. And I find artists are really working with these ideas about how disciplines are woven together and they're drawing out. For example, this is to me a very clear example. At New York University, a few months ago, we went to a major gathering at the law school, and the law school was presenting a whole set of conferences on the more than human world. So it was weaving together whole ideas of new modes of rights of nature, or earth jurisprudence, or earth law, as we call it, with concepts of artistic presentation and social science laying out data or statistics on what life actually generates in different settings. So the art world is filled with this. And then secondly, technology. And just to make a short comment that's more provocative than explanatory, everywhere we go now, people want to talk about AI. And it's obvious it's both very problematic because of what replacing people in their work, employment, jobs, and also the sense of the possibility of new forms of human imagination in these artificial technological expressions or large language models. But there's also the sense that the complexity of the earth, we have hardly been able to penetrate into soils or water. The amount of data is just overwhelming. And now there is this new possibility of AI generated capacity to deal with information at the speed of light. This may provide the human with the possibility of depth responsibility, where we really begin to understand what it means when the world is nurturing one another as well as ourselves. And that responsibility, I think, is one of the ways that this technology doesn't become an end in itself, but it becomes a way to help the flourishing, the mutual flourishing of humans and Earth.
Thanks, John. Michael, you have a hand up. Thank you, Bill. Great question.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. It was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. So I'm a high school theology teacher out here in Chicago, and I work with sophomores and seniors. And with my sophomores, we teach them scripture, and we just finished a unit on the creation stories. And I like to bring in a piece by Elizabeth Johnson called "Believing in an Ecological God." Um, and the students, they really respond to it well. They've never really thought of God and ecology kind of going together. And they love this idea of, looking at the universe with awe and whatnot. But what I found really kind of depressing was at the end of a seminar we did on it. I asked them, well, raise your hand if you think the climate's going to be better, raise your hand if you think it's going to be about the same, and raise your hand if you think it's going to be worse by the time you're my age. And most of them thought the climate was going to be much, much worse by the time they're my age, which these are, 16-year-olds, in high school. I'm wondering, what do Barry and Desjardins, what do they talk about when it comes to keeping that hope, keeping that fire alive, in the face of, seeming, inevitability that the climate will get worse? How do they do that?
Well, of course, climate change wasn't the problem it is now. When Teilhard was living, he died, as you know, in 55. So it wasn't on the top of his mind at all. And even 20 years ago, people didn't understand it. When I was part of the drafting committee of the Earth Charter, and climate change is not overtly mentioned there, the environment more broadly speaking. So, and Thomas died in 2009. So he wasn't talking specifically about climate change either. He was talking about, from the time we met him, John in 68, myself in 75, he was talking about environmental problems that he could foresee. So just, in that sense, your question is so important. I mean, Jennifer Morgan's trying to get us to do a session. What would Thomas say in relation to our issues, which is, I think, your very perceptive question too. And John, I don't know if you want to jump in on there.
I feel Thomas would begin by referring to his essay and book titled The Great Work, in which he felt as a cultural historian that every age, when they realized the great calling of their time, it became a profound vision. And I think we are beginning to realize that what we have done to the planet, it calls forth from us a depth of responsibility, or not only will human children not go into the future, but the children of all of the species will be impaired and will not go into the future. So the sense of a depth of responsibility by understanding of the work that we have to do and what that work looked like, I think, is obviously so diverse and it's so different in many different fields. But Thomas would identify it by his vision of the meadow across the creek, that when he was young, he had this rather exceptional experience that stayed with him through his life, and he articulated it later in his life, where he looked at this meadow and he realized that an educational system that made that a better meadow, that was the best education he could hope for. And a medical practice that would actually assist that meadow in its own health system. So he began to see the human tied into the earth system as a young person, and that stayed with him through his life. So the commitment of the great work to fostering human-earth relations, and he would express that then, that the way to undertake that great work was to realize the communion experience, that we are not dealing with dead objects in the world, they are speaking to us, that the subjectivity of the world, the communion of subjects, is the capacity of the human to enter into relationship with the earth, as it teaches us. That beautiful line in the book of Job, look to the earth and it shall teach you. I sense that's part of what I find, Michael, in my studies with indigenous people who have long spoken about these realities and are so frustrated, of course, by the inability of settlers to really understand what their depth of spiritual vision has been about for centuries for them. And they are aware of themselves having problems in their own cultural life with reality. They came to an understanding that they had to listen to the earth to learn how to live in a bioregion. And I think we're at that same point. We're trying to listen to the earth to learn how to live in a planetary mode.
Yeah.
Your question is the question of our times.
Yeah, totally. And I think you're asking, and on behalf of your students, which we completely get, is how can we have resilience, right? In a time of such breakdown and such unforeseen radical dismemberment. This is like a shamanic dismemberment that's happening not only in our country, but around the world. And I think, frankly, we can say I don't use the word faith a lot, but this is the biggest challenge, I think, to religions of what are we going to do with our suffering when religions are inadequate in certain ways to answer these questions. The students coming into Yale to study this want something bigger. They want a language of encompassing spirituality that we're trying to suggest here, but this is only a beginning, inadequate in some ways to where we need to go. So I just want to affirm your question is the question. I'm left sleepless at night about these issues, both environmental and political, and I'm sure you all are as well. But if you take what indigenous peoples have suffered, what African Americans and Hispanics and others in this country, and what the Chinese have gone through in a 5,000-year civilization, there is resilience in the human spirit. So how we bring that forward.
I'd also recommend, Michael, that consider adding the Spirituality of the Earth essay from Barry, and also John Hout, or his friends call him Jack Hout, Haught. John Hout, a major Teilhard scholar, and he is very committed to a scriptural understanding of Teilhard. And he talks especially about the promise given to the Israelite peoples of land, children, and generations. But that sense of promise is what Hott brings forward in a Teilhardian perspective. So those I would recommend.
Right. And it's been mentioned in the chat that,
Thanks very much.
yeah, thank you. That this website that we've just mentioned that we're pretty excited about, the intelligences of nature, Mother Tree, Suzanne Simard, and the roots and so on, and the ecological worldviews, deep time, cosmological time, but also Gaia hypothesis, deep ecology, a whole range of things. And then the Earth law is, of course, what Thomas helped to start with an Earth jurisprudence, which you can see at the end of Evening Thoughts. But that course that is on Jennifer Morgan's Steep Time is Tony Jelly is teaching it, and there's, I don't know, 45 people in it. And and we were just in New York with him and other people in the Earth Law movement and Rights of Nature movement.
But this new website, livingearthcommunity.com, is a marvelous moment of exploration. Please enjoy it.
Yeah. Luke, I don't know what your time limit is and whether we have time for one more question, but I don't know when you usually end. When do you conclude?
3 hours from now. No.
I love it.
What a trickster.
We'll have a slumber party.
I'm curious. I'll take. I'm. You mentioned hope at the beginning, and you were just in New York, and I'm just curious. I think that is such an interesting word right now.
Yeah.
And I'm, being there because nationally it's like, what, it feels almost hopeless and useless. And I'm curious, it feels like, let's just move on from that. And I'm curious if, I'm sure a lot of people feel that way, if that's leading toward a lot of these grassroots movements, knowing that it's hopeless up there, so we might as well do the work here versus trying to change up there. Are you finding that, and just maybe some reflections from last week in New York?
Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing I don't know if I mentioned it, I was so taken with the folding of spirituality in so many of the discussions about climate, whether it was from a technical policy standpoint or the science of heat trapping gases, or, and most interestingly, the finance. All of the cap and trade, they were all interested in this perspective of spirituality. So Luke, that's one expression I find of the hope that's emerging.
I spoke on a couple panels, but one was, I think, Tuesday morning that happened to be at the Yale Club. And I thought, first of all, the topic was intangible values and how can we measure them for a financing towards climate change, which means ecosystem services. You may be familiar with what's water areas and places that give services to the humans.
Yeah, monetizing
nature, which necessary but not sufficient. And this one was going to such an extreme, I almost said I don't want to be on the panel. But it says, how do we monetize intangible values so that people dealing with climate change will understand? And the rest of the people on the panel shared the skepticism, but they also, the one who ended it he said, I have skepticism, but also radical hope, which was very, very interesting. But I wanted to say, I put my papers down because the audience was largely next gen, largely probably 60% women. I thought they'd be all coming up from Wall Street with pinstripe suits and so on, the Yale Club. But this next gen, I feel they have an unusual sense of their own creativity, which you could call hope and possibility. But what I tried to do was to say, I began by saying, because the group sponsoring it is a foundation in Utah, and I said, look, the Great Salt Lake, the sands are blowing into the deserts of Utah. We're losing the Great Salt Lake.
Drying
And
up.
a city like Tehran with 10 million people is running out of water. You can take just two examples like that, and it's like the whole atmosphere changes. And then I was just speaking from the heart that we have to share, like Michael's question and Bill's in some ways, we have to share our grief, we have to share our concerns and our worries. But when we open, as Johanna Macy said so beautifully, when we open the heart and we
Break it.
say what we love, something new emerges. And you could feel the energy in the room. Some people were crying. Women later especially said to me, by opening the heart, you changed the whole atmosphere there. And I'm simply saying, people like Joanna Macy and others have done that space to say, yes, our lament is real. Yes, our grief is real, but so is our gratitude, and so is the possibility for hope. So mingling these things is part of the way forward.
I just want to mention we're actually going to have Maureen Wild, who was a student of Joanna Macy early in 2026, do a program for us at the Well. So great plug there, Mary Evelyn. Thank you.
Yes,
And
love
in the
Maureen.
conversation of hope, I want to plug this documentary called 2040. I put the link in the chat. Definitely watch the trailer. It's a couple years outdated at this point. I believe it was filmed before COVID, but it takes a very different approach to environmental sustainability in that it's looking at, like Luke said, those grassroots efforts that are happening around the world, and then projects out, well, what could the world look like in 2040 if more people adopted these practices? So it's really informational, and just it gives me a good sense of hope when I start to feel a little bit overwhelmed by all of the things in the world. So I just wanted to mention that.
That's great. I hope you can
Good,
send
good.
some of the links to us, Sarah, because I can't copy them and put them in my email. So love it if you could. There's some other wonderful ones on art and extinction, etc. So thank you for that. Yeah, cutting and pasting the links. There it came up. So Sarah will do that. And we'll also send you our flyer on Journey of the Universe where you get direct
Yes.
access to it, and a
And
flyer.
please send it around to everyone.
Yeah. Anybody else? Anything else bubbling up? Sheila, there she is.
Yeah, real quickly, this intelligence of nature.
Yep.
Good.
Chief ecologist Ernie Ness said the ecological self is in and of nature from the very beginning. It is anybody teaching prenatal science at this intelligence and the intelligence of the gestating body and ed.
Great question. We knew Arnie Ness very well, and he came to the original conference on the universe story, actually, out at San Domenico. So
they say that womb ecology becomes world ecology, and that you could change things within 2 generations if we gave that dyad the support that they need in a non-toxic environment.
I love it.
Amazing prenatal knowledge.
Yeah. Well, again, you're reminding us of how important this is, and I'm somehow referring back to Mary Southard's work. I wish I could just go get the picture, but it's a woman in the womb, with the baby in the womb. Maybe that's the picture we'll use, and it's extremely powerful. But I also just want to say what we often say about the environment. This isn't a political issue.
No.
This is food, health, and children.
Right.
And it comes right to your point of how can a healthy child grow in a healthy womb?
And we did talk about embodied, and that is an embodied relational connection from the very beginning.
From the beginning.
Exactly.
And now the question also about where are the creative juices coming, Sheila? I think you're putting your finger on a very important point. that multiple modes of knowing now are surfacing in these settings. And how would we have thought earlier of prenatal knowledge?
Right.
But there it is. There's a whole sense of embodied knowledge which is taking place in this cultivated area of the womb.
Exactly. That's our first learning environment.
Totally.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you.
Mhm.
Well,
So,
thank
Luke,
you both, Mary Evelyn and John, for your time today. As gives us so much to think about as we, I hate to say end season of creation, as we continue the season of creation moving forward and honoring the well as well for our 25th anniversary. And safe travels to you as you go to Minneapolis and to South Bend. Before we at the well have a tradition of a blessing for our presenters. Before we do that, I just wanted to thank everybody else for being here as well, and just remind you of some programs that are coming up at the well that I think are natural transitions from what we spoke about today. Um, with John's work on October 15th, we're excited to welcome Sister Kristen Tomei, who's a Dominican sister of Sinsinawa, for a program titled Roots of Harm, Seeds of Hope, Walking with Native Communities on a Path of Reconciliation, which will unpack the role of the doctrine of discovery and its harm on Native peoples. And it'll be hybrid. So I hope you can join us for that. And then there's Climate Week in New York, but as many of you know, COP30 is coming up in November, which is the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Brazil. And we're hosting a prayer at the beginning of it on November 10th. And then on November 24th, the UN representative for the Dominican Sisters International Confederation is going to be joining the well talking about outcomes, conclusions, ways to get involved from that conference. And we're called to be pilgrims of hope, how we can be pilgrims of hope during this time. So I hope you'll join us for that. And we'll, of course, send around all the links that have been here in the chat to everybody. So we thank you so much for coming, and we offer a blessing that's a song by Sister Kathy Sherman to all of our presenters. And Sister Kathy's on retreat, so unfortunately I'm tasked with doing the music. So maybe we can just take a moment, and those on Zoom, if you can raise your arms in blessing, and maybe if we'll mute ourselves for Mary Evelyn, for John, for all of us here, for everybody who's willing to be a pilgrim of hope during this time. So as I sing one line, maybe just repeat it to yourself in quiet. So let's sing. Love be with you. Peace around you. The presence of God be with you. Amen.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, everybody.
I see Francis has a question, but maybe you can send it to us. I don't know. Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, we're happy to.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone.
All best.
All the best.
Your healing presence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all you do.